Modern culture has a strange way of talking about long marriages. People either romanticize them completely or quietly pity them. They look at couples who stay together for 30 years and assume one of two things. Either they must be soulmates, or they probably stayed out of habit. And honestly, both assumptions completely miss what actually happened. Because people who stay together for 30 years usually built something modern culture barely understands anymore, something far deeper than constant romance. You can recognize these couples almost immediately. They don't perform their relationship constantly. They aren't trying to impress each other every 5 minutes. Sometimes they sit quietly at restaurants without talking much at all. One reaches for the other person's coffee automatically. One knows the exact story the other is about to repeat before it even starts. One notices the mood shift immediately from the sound of a closing door. One wakes up at 2 a.m. and finds the other asleep in the recliner with the television still on. And instead of annoyance, there's comfort in the familiarity of it. From the outside, it can almost look boring, especially to a culture addicted to excitement. But psychologists found something surprising about long-term couples. What keeps people together for decades is usually not endless passion. It's emotional safety. And emotional safety has quietly become one of the rarest experiences in modern life. That's the part people misunderstand. Modern culture teaches people to think love should always feel in butterflies, chemistry, excitement, constant emotional stimulation. The relationship should always feel alive, and if it stops feeling exciting, people start wondering if something is wrong. But couples who actually made it 30 years learn something younger people usually discover much later. Feelings naturally change. Life naturally changes. People naturally changes. There are years when both people are exhausted. Years where stress changes the relationship completely. Years where survival matters more than romance. Illness enters the house. Money becomes tight. Parents die. Children grow up and leave. Bodies age. And through all of that, some couples still remain beside each other. Not because the original spark stayed exactly the same forever, but because the relationship slowly transformed into something steadier, something calmer, something stronger than excitement. Anthropologist Helen Fisher spent decades studying romantic love and discovered that the intense emotional phase people associate with being in love was never biologically designed to stay at maximum intensity forever. It changes, not because the relationship failed, because human attachment evolves. The beginning pulls two people together, but what comes later is what keeps them there. And what comes later looks nothing like a Hollywood movie. It looks ordinary. Quiet, predictable, but underneath that predictable surface, something incredible is happening. Your nervous system slowly learns, this person is safe. Their voice calms you. Their presence lowers anxiety. Their routines become familiar to your body itself. That's why couples who have been together for decades often communicate through tiny things nobody else notices. A glance, a sigh, a silence. After 30 years, your partner often understands your emotional state before you explain it yourself. No new relationship can fast forward that kind of knowing. 30 years of attention cannot be replaced quickly. And maybe that's why long marriages survive things newer relationships often cannot. Because history itself becomes adhesive. You remember what you survived together. The difficult years, the health scares, the funerals, the financial stress. The years where life stopped being romantic entirely and simply became hard. And when two people survive enough difficulty together, something changes psychologically. The relationship stops feeling optional. It starts feeling foundational. After 30 years together, you are no longer just sharing emotions. You are sharing an entire life. Bills, sickness, responsibilities, repairs, children, losses. You stop being two separate people trying to stay in love. You become two people carrying life together. Psychologist Aron spent years studying long-term couples and discovered something fascinating. Over time, people slowly begin incorporating each other into their own sense of identity, which explains why couples together for decades often speak in we instead of I. We went through that. We remember those years. We struggled back then. Their lives become emotionally intertwined, not because they lost individuality, because they built a shared emotional world together. That's why people who have been married for 30 years often look at modern dating culture with confusion, because modern relationships are increasingly evaluated like products. People constantly ask, could I do better? Am I still excited enough? What if someone more compatible exists? But long-term couples often approached relationships differently, not as something to endlessly optimize, but as something to slowly build. And maybe that mindset created stronger emotional foundations than people realize, especially during difficult periods. Because every 30-year marriage eventually experiences seasons where love feels difficult. There are moments where one person becomes hard to live with, moments where patience becomes more important than passion, moments where staying requires maturity instead of emotion. And modern culture rarely talks honestly about that. It teaches people to chase emotional highs constantly, but the couples who stayed together for decades often discovered something more valuable than constant excitement. Reliability, the comfort of knowing somebody stayed, the safety of knowing somebody continued choosing you after seeing every imperfect version of yourself. That feeling changes people deeply, because being completely known by another human being is incredibly rare. Not performed for, not managed carefully. Known, the younger version of you, the frightened version, the exhausted version, the grieving version, and somehow they stayed long enough to know all of them. That kind of emotional continuity becomes priceless with age. The Harvard Study of Adult Development, one of the longest-running studies ever conducted on human happiness, found that strong, long-term relationships were one of the greatest predictors of emotional well-being later in life. Not money, not status, relationships. Because human beings were never designed to carry life completely alone. And after 30 years together, a partner often becomes more than romance. They become witness, the witness to your entire adult life. The keeper of memories nobody else fully remembers anymore. The one person who knew you before time changed everything. And maybe that's why society misunderstands long marriages so badly. Modern culture sees couples who stayed together for decades and assumes they settled. That they became boring, predictable, emotionally stagnant. But psychologists increasingly suggest something very different. Long-term stable relationships create levels of emotional safety younger generations increasingly struggle to find. And emotional safety changes people. It lowers stress, creates stability, builds resilience, gives people a sense of psychological home in a world that often feels chaotic. That's not settling. That's something many people secretly want far more than endless excitement. The truth is, most long marriages survived because two people learned how to stop chasing constant emotional intensity and started valuing something deeper instead. Loyalty, peace, trust, familiarity, the comfort of shared history, the quiet knowledge that somebody remained. So no, if you're still together after 30 years, it probably isn't because of love alone. At least, not the version modern culture usually talks about. It's because love slowly transformed into something steadier, something calmer, something less performative, something that stopped trying to impress you and started trying to protect you. And in a world where almost everything now feels replaceable, that kind of lasting connection has quietly become one of the rarest things left. Before you go, how long have you been with your partner? And what's one small thing about them that still feels like home? Comment below. I read every single one.